Okay, so good day to everyone, especially for those who are viewing this video paper presentation. So my paper presentation today talks about this title, What the Students Think and Feel. That's the implications of teaching historical empathy in social studies classroom. Okay, so here's my presentation outline. As you can see, we begin this discussion by pointing out the different status of the social studies in the Philippines and historical thinking, followed by conceptualizing the idea of historical empathy, together with my objectives and methodology for this particular specific paper and the results and discussion, together with the implications in teaching social studies. So majority of this paper presentation was lifted from my graduate thesis, um, on about teaching historical empathy. So the social studies curriculum, okay, in the Philippine context, as we can notice, no, it is comprises of the different ideas, concepts, and principles lifted from the different social sciences disciplines and, of course, with the humanities. That is, the social studies curriculum aims our students to prepare for their future participation in our society and strengthening their citizenship capabilities. Thus, as part of the social studies curriculum, the teaching of the teaching of history in the basic education continuously address perennial concerns such as the factual errors in the textbook, teacher preparation, students' perception of the subject, and the misaligned competencies and strategies. With the goals and aims of the K-12 social studies curriculum, learning history invites students to inquire, construct meaning, and encourages them to practice like a historian. This implies that teaching history should not only focus on mere memorization, but on the of facts rather, but allow students to deeply understand historical information through active engagement and constant use of their historical thinking skills. Historical thinking skills empower students. These are set of skills that allow our students to learn historical concepts and ideas beyond of the given facts. Okay? So since the social studies curriculum permits students to develop their critical thinking skills, learning history through historical thinking gives learners unnatural ways or new ways or refreshing ways to appreciate lessons in history. According to different scholars, inquiring, uh, reasoning out, interpreting, contextualizing, corroborating, evidence based assessing, and evaluating facts are some of the examples of historical thinking. Furthermore, social studies and history education scholars pointed out that the appreciation of facts, events, figures, historical figures, places, a student must develop not only the historical thinking skills, but also their historical empathy. Historical empathy poses a refreshing way to realize how students would appreciate now social history topics. No? So historical empathy has a different ontological interpretations by different scholars from the field of social studies and history education. So this is a contested term. According to Lee and Schmidt in 2011, these are ideas or concept that there's not to speak in its name because of its different interpretation by different scholars. Interestingly, developing historical empathy has yet to be firmly established in the realm of historical thinking due to the different manifestations and explanation as expounded by different scholars or by the different views of our scholars. Simply put, historical empathy was defined as an ability to put the students the students into the shoes or into the conditions of the various historical figures, the situations they need to decide to understand the mentality of these historical figures using historical evidences, which allows also our students to reduce prejudice and misconceptions about the people and events from the past. This term was challenged by different social studies and education scholars on how the students can actually practice and manifest their empathetic abilities. Throughout the past decade, the definition varies on the juxtaposition of research in different social studies and history classrooms. Furthermore, history education, historical empathy allows students to reduce prejudice and misconceptions of the people, and of course, to develop their intellectual and mature disposition on the different situation, events, and actions of the people from the past. Moreover, historical empathy is an ability of the student to enter into some informed appreciation of the views of other people that includes affective and cognitive thinking. In the context of this paper, there are this paper or this study uses the theoretical and conceptual definition of Endicott and Brooks about historical empathy. According to these scholars, the term allows the students cognitive and affective engagement with historical figures to further understand and contextualize lived experiences, decisions, and actions. It also provided a visual conceptualization on how historical empathy can be exhibited by students. According to the scholars, there are three dimensions of historical empathy. First is the historical contextualization, second is perspective taking, and affective connections. In conceptualizing historical empathy, historical contextualization is a dimension where it refers to the temporal sense of differences that includes a deep understanding of social, political, and cultural norms of the time period under investigation, as well as knowledge of the events leading up to the historical situation and other relevant events that are happening concurrently. This allows students to situate themselves in a particular event from the past. Furthermore, Endicott and Brooks also emphasize that perspective taking refers now to the another prior's lived experiences, principles, positions, attitudes, and beliefs in order to understand how the person may have thought about the situation. And finally, the third dimension, affective dimension, refers to how historical figures' lived experiences, situations, or actions may influence students' affective response based on a connection to one's own similar yet different life experiences. While this paper acknowledges the limitation of studies in the historical thinking in the Philippines, it also recognizes that there is a dearth of practice or of exploring, of researching now how the students practice historical empathy inside our social studies classroom. The earlier studies provided by Cristobal, Ani, Collis, and Fernandez pointed out that historical thinking can be possibly taught explicitly taught inside the classroom. However, because of the dearth of studies in historical empathy, the study of this particular of from this particular lifted from this particular under from this graduate paper pointed out that historical empathy provides a new way to appreciate now history teaching and learning to our students as well as teachers. Hence, the main objectives of this paper is to explore and provide ways on how historical empathy was being practiced inside the classroom. Also, it also tries to attempts to answer what are the instructional implications of teaching historical empathy. More importantly, it will not only help the in-service teachers that are teaching us history classes in different social studies classroom, but also it provides now the pre-service teachers an idea, a refreshing way on how to learn or how to teach history in the other way around. For the methodology, this paper was lifted from the research study of Aguilar 2019 about how grade 8 students practice historical empathy about a specific lesson on Holocaust during World War II. So in other words, in this particular methodology, the researcher had created now or had choose grade 8 students in a particular school in Antipolo City. As part of the methodology, qualitative research design was being considered as part of it aside from the quantitative results. But for the purpose of this presentation, we will only focus on the qualitative results. Now, where did we get the facts, or rather the data? We had recorded and transcribed classroom conversations, and if not, analyzed student worksheets. We had also used thematic analysis and coding of these responses. So, as I pointed out earlier, uh, this is a specific, it is lifted from a particular portion of a paper, of my research paper before, of a thesis, of my under a master's thesis before, that focuses on historical empathy. Okay, so for this particular aspect, we will focus on World War II, or in particular, specifically in the lesson of Holocaust. Using several learning resources, that is photographs, posters, video clips, and statements, vis-a-vis with the different teaching activities and techniques, try, we will try to look at now how the students practice historical empathy. To further analyze now the students' responses, thematic analysis and coding was utilized. Pivoting from the study of Endicott and Brooks' historical empathy framework, the researcher, or this paper now aligned all of the students' responses into the different frameworks of Endicott and Brooks, or the dimensions of historical empathy provided by Endicott and Brooks. The table shows that this slide shows how the responses can be described and explicitly manifested by students based from their conversations and answers. In this particular table, we had the researcher had the presenter had divided, or if not classified, the students' responses. When the student answers now affective connections, some of the responses would use emotionally charged descriptions and words. For as such, the manifestations would include now how the students would like to express themselves after learning, or if not during the learning process. No, this is how we can look at how historical empathy would like to be incorporated among our students. The second is historical contextualization. In historical contextualization, we had now tried to determine now, with the help of this description, that there are different adjectives that describes now the particular historical context in the question, statements that are chronologically, socially, culturally, and politically relevant to the event. Next is perspective taking. Now, this perspective taking, we can determine now the students' responses if they are practicing perspective taking, if there are words that includes now specifics about historical figures, worldviews, and beliefs in general. Finally, empathetic thinking pointed out that the students' responses are well-grounded statements about the informed disposition of the events, situations, and people from the past. This particular table will be our guide in determining now how the students now practice historical empathy in this particular lesson on in Holocaust. Now, for the results and discussion, I have divided it into three aspects. So I would like to introduce now how the qualitative data suggests that historical empathy could be in two forms: as a thinking process and an output or outcome for the students. The sample conversation, classroom conversation, and activities reveal students who were exposed to different resources materials are more capable of developing and practicing historical empathy. The results also indicated that historical empathy can be enforced or naturally comes out with their ability to explain. So let's try to look first on this first particular uh, procedures. So during the gathering, or if not during the time that this paper was being crafted, so the teacher at that time provided historical context and background about Holocaust. More importantly, the teacher who were handling that particular class provide the students with different resource materials. There are primary source that includes now historical photographs about the concentration camps and the Jews who had experienced hardship during the Holocaust. This was lifted from different and verified websites that teaches now Holocaust education. Now, the next is primary sources. There are also the teacher also had provided narratives from a particular German soldier, or if not, from different Holocaust survivors. So for that, the students to have a strong contextual background on the ideas of what was the Holocaust is all about, and how do the Jewish people had suffered from Holocaust at that time. The last source, another source that we had provided is video clips. The teacher had used two scenes from the movie Schindler's List that was premiered in 1993. Instructional activities that can be provided here. Sample instructional activities would include now the processing questions that are aligned to the historical empathy framework of Endicott and Brooks, the photo analysis worksheet, and the letter writing activity. In this particular sample, processing and instructions, as we had pointed out here, these are the activity used by the teacher, provided by the sample processing questions, and classified historical empathy component. In other words, the processing questions also contributes now, or the development of the different processing questions are also aligned to the idea of the dimensions of historical empathy framework provided by Endicott and Brooks. So, first portion is the thinking and feeling with video clips. The students were provided a contextual background of the Holocaust. And on the other hand, they all had also presented the film, The Schindler's List. The pictures of the victims, as well as the videos from this particular, or short clips from this particular film, was being presented to the students. It contributes now, the results, some of the sample responses show that it had presented much manifestation of historical empathy among our students. As the two scenes were presented, such as the liquidation of Jews and the balcony shootings were being presented, that these sample responses appeared on the students, appeared, or if not being explained by our students, based on the question, what were their reactions, their first initial reactions, and their ideas about how Holocaust had really happened at that time. So for the students, in the for the purpose of this paper, we had translated it into English. And if we try to classify now the students' responses, it was presented that the students are practicing now different manifestations or different dimensions of historical empathy. One student had pointed out that a perspective taking view of historical empathy, that that the particular student wished the German soldiers considered the Jews as people, because the way they were killed was not right and inhumane. In other words, there is this sense of responsibility for this particular student, that the Germans should look at now that the Jews are also the same. They are also humans that should not be killed, no, like an animal, no. One student portrayed affective connections, as it was mentioned. The student was angry about how Germans killed the Jews, especially on the liquidation scene of the video, because they did not give the Jews a chance. With the expression of "I'm not, I am angry," that particular student shows now a very strong affective connection to what was really happening to those people who had really experienced at that time. Even though that the video clips are part of a larger a film, in this particular film reenacting now some of the ideas or the atrocities during the Holocaust itself, the students felt they were being attached to the Jews at this particular point in time. One student had provided an empathetic thinking because for that student, it is not just about the trauma caused by the living inside the concentration camp, but also uh, that student also sees people without they will be killed. No, this particular Jews will be killed. um, for that student you for that student you will carry it with you when you go out of the concentration camps and tell about it. That's it, if you will be safe. In other words, this particular statement shows that the student now empathetically thinks, no, how the Jews had felt and thought living about their living conditions inside the concentration camps. The level of empathy manifests differs from the choice of words or statements that they had used. The common way of empathizing the groups were being provided here with the emotions, with the points of views of those people who had lived at the time. And finally, um, dito, they had expressed, no, that these people had uh, they had also the same conditions with the students' experiences, or with this knowledge, to the extent of student knowledge. In other words, the student responses from this particular table suggested that they had understood and felt how it was to be a Jew or a German during that particular time of Holocaust in World War II. Another activity was being provided to the students, in which the study had also revealed that when students practice historical empathy through writing, it allows them to immerse, to think, and to feel as if they were part of the World War II event of Holocaust. So before they had presented their writing activities, they were being provided by pictures of the Jewish people who had lived in the concentration camps, and if not during that particular aspect of wartime in uh, in Auschwitz. The given visual images and other resources to the students allows them to create an entry point to connect and situate themselves as a writer. It is expected that historical empathy through writing develops students' capability to analyze and make a standpoint, to evaluate events from the past using various sources critically. In this particular aspect, the writing activity showed that as if they are part of the people inside that concentration camp with this particular letter. In this particular letter, the student portrayed himself as one of the Jews inside the concentration camp, and how that particular student shared this experience inside the concentration camp. If we will try to analyze this writing activity of our students, what I did is to classify now sentence by sentence the responses, or the sentence by sentence the letter. In this particular aspect, the student had shown affective connections, historical contextualization, and perspective taking dimensions while writing that particular uh, activity, no, that letter writing activity. In this particular letter also activity, the student had also explained that empathetic, how he is empathetic to the conditions of the Jews living inside the concentration camp. Moreover, students' empathetic reactions are highly individualized. It was a beneficial activity in identifying historical empathy. Writing activities tailored fit to a specific situation, such as how the Jews had lived inside the concentration camp, allowed the students to activate their empathetic responses. The third is students were asked to analyze Holocaust historical photos using a photo analysis worksheet. There were different photos that were utilized as being provided also or presented in these particular slides. These are photos of Jews as human experiments, the mass execution of the Jews, the Jewish children as medical experiments, Jewish corpse, and mass grave and burning of dead bodies. Students were asked to describe the people, actions, and their further inferences from the pictures provided. Hence, the succeeding slides would also provide us their avenues or their ways now how they have described this particular pictures. These are the pictures that the succeeding slides that I will present are the pictures that were being used during the time of this particular research is uh, happening. No? So we had used the different, the teacher had used different pictures such as this one, and this one to allow the students to think of the conditions of the Jews inside the concentration camps. This table now provides us how the students had described the person. That means the people inside the pictures. How they did describe the environment and things. And how do they describe the actions inside the pictures. Most of the students shows that, or if not, most of these particular responses showed that they had viewed the experience, the Jewish experience inside the concentration camps heavily in all aspects. They had described people and environment and the actions of the children who experienced the atrocities as part of the human experiments, describes the children as victims of experimentation, and referred to them as medical objects. They had also described the environment as places where the Jews experienced difficulty using the word mass grave, where this particular Jews were butchered and killed. In one point also, they had also provided now this perspective taking on how they had looked at the Jews living inside the concentration camp, and how do they felt about how what how do they felt, no, as if they were trying to live also inside the concentration camps. So much of the words that being used by their students with their choices are based on the perspective taking and affective connections. So if you will try to look at on this particular table, this now shows that the students are they are now immersed on historical empathy, on their empathetic practices, because their responses based on the worksheet had shown to us that the students now are empathizing historically with the different resources. With the help of these resources, they had felt that they had considered themselves uh, as part of this particular sufferings, no, of the Jews, because of also of this particular guide questions or processing questions provided at that time. The students also pointed out that the Jews had experienced massive atrocities. They had experienced now uh, inhumane experiences during the time of Holocaust. More also, that this particular table shows the students' inferences and perceived messages on the photos. Common responses inferred from the photos were the Jews who experienced hardships and difficulties, as if they were separated also from their families. Also, they had suffered from, most of the students thought that they had suffered from Hitler's unreasonable hatred. Such sufferings and hardships also led the students to express their feelings, such as anger, sadness, and deep pain, as if they are trying to also to sympathize with the Jews as well as empathize as well. It can also be noted that the inferences made by the students included an articulation of the gravity of human destruction that is beyond reason. Most likely, um, one student also had pointed out that why would such event happen in our history, shows that he is The student is contemplating and reflecting now, why do the people from the past had, especially those who are victims of the Holocaust and even the Nazi Germans, would like to do such atrocities to other people. The last particular portion of the worksheet says that if the people in the images or inside the photos are speaking to you, what do they want to tell you? The students' answers were to they're begging not to be killed, stop the hardships, and end the war now. They're saying it's like unjustifiable for them to be killed and us to have a decent life. These imply that the students' effective responses to the questions enable them to associate and to analyze images with how people at that particular time experience Holocaust. They had understood the conditions through observing and analyzing the images. Hence, they can constructively explain the historical conditions. The students' responses also suggest that different resources such as photos, historical photos, increase meaningful historical learning and understanding towards a particular event in the past. All the collated responses suggest that different resources allowed students to enter into the past. This contributed not only what they can know about the Holocaust is, but what they can understand from it. The collated answers are similar to different scholar studies that pointed out that historical empathy allows students cognitive and affective thinking to work with the help of historical evidences. In the context of this paper, students practice now thinking and feeling dimensions to form concise decision making and moral judgments of what they had learned. Now, based from this particular sample outputs or if not data, what can we learn about teaching historical empathy and its implications in teaching social studies? The use of different resources uncovered students' deep historical understanding to foster and practice their historical empathy. The classroom discussions show that historical empathy is a thinking skill and a process that can be further enhanced. Moreover, the extensive use of several learning resources in classroom discussions not only let students appreciate the lesson, but leave an imprint on the way they think and feel about historical events. It is also through the various activities that students are able to deeply think and reflect on specific resources in learning that particular event, such as the Holocaust. Classroom discussions can develop historical empathy. It is shown that the response of the students convinced this paper to utilize now different resources as different powerful tools to analyze now various situations of the in the past. The resources such as the pictures, video clips, and statements contribute to the ways understanding of Holocaust and the experience of the Jews at that time. In the course of study of this particular aspect, evidence skills among students are interpreting, corroboration, describing, and understanding, and having a feel of this topic. These skills allows them to empathize with understandings from the past and enable them to contextualize and to develop different perspectives on various events, situation, and conditions. Historical thinking skills such as interpretation, corroboration, and contextualization promote the students' intellectual dispositions and empathetic thinking. Now, this paper suggests that pre-service teachers in the teaching education institutions, especially those who are handling um, social studies courses, okay, must learn how to integrate historical empathy uh, in their ways and means to help the students appreciate now the teaching and learning of history. Learning to integrate historical thinking skills in various activities and within their action lesson plans develop now techniques and strategies that promotes historical empathy. In other words, when the in-service teachers now attempts to develop their lesson plans, they might consider also including now historical empathy or the practice of historical empathy and the incorporation of different historical thinking skills. As I pointed out earlier, instructors handling history education content for social studies majors must be exposed to the extensive use of historical thinking skills to encourage their future students to practice and to display explicitly their historical empathy. Implications of teaching historical empathy in social studies classroom allow in-service teachers to explore the use of different primary and secondary sources at all forms as part of their instructional learning and resource materials. While historical thinking and historical empathy were relatively new in the realm of learning and understanding history for social studies classroom, it offers a promise of allowing our students to develop intellectual dispositions toward a variety of historical topics or if not, historical controversial issues. Furthermore, the implications of teaching historical empathy and historical thinking in social studies empowers now the future educators to utilize and maximize now all the learning resource materials that is available to them and develop their own ways and techniques to engage now future students historical thinking and later on promote their historical empathy. So thank you so much for listening in this particular paper. So here are my references. And once again, thank you so much for listening.